Good afternoon to you, alumni and friends. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Reopen, Recover, and Roar. I'm Alexa Dembski, the Assistant Director of Alumni Outreach Programs and a proud 2013 graduate of Towson University. To start, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. Attendees will remain muted throughout the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the chat box feature and send your questions to all panelists. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the session and will take additional questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar will also be recorded and shared on our social media platforms in the coming weeks in case you missed something during the presentation. I'd now like to introduce Gary Ditto, a 1989 TU graduate and a board member of the TU Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance.
Thanks, Alexa, and hello to everyone joining us virtually today for the second event hosted by the newly formed Towson Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance. As Alexa said, my name is Gary Ditto. I'm the founder and president at Who Staffing, a boutique recruiting firm located in Owings Mills. I'm a Towson University graduate with a degree in mass communications, and I also serve on the executive committee of the Towson University Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance. The Alliance consists of Towson graduates who are interested in connecting with fellow alumni through professional and social networking opportunities. Our Alliance is open to all graduates, and our mission is providing leadership development and business growth for our alumni members, as well as providing mentorship services to the current student population at Towson University. You can join the Alliance by visiting Tiger Connect at alumni.towson.edu and selecting the Business and Leadership Alliance under the Groups tab. Also, you can stay current on our event schedule by accessing our Facebook and LinkedIn group pages. I'd like to take a quick minute to thank Kiefer Rittenhouse for his help in putting this event together, as well as Jonathan Oleski, the current president of the Business and Leadership Alliance, and obviously Alexa, Jenna, and Stephen at Towson University's alumni office staff for all of their support from a programming, marketing, and technology standpoint. I'm now going to toss this over to today's moderator, Katie Bush, a 2014 Towson graduate and fellow member of the Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance. Katie?
Great, thanks, Gary. My fellow Tigers, we're so excited to have all of you here today. We have a great lineup of panelists that represent a variety of different industries that are here to share their experience and what they're dealing with right now. And we're really excited, so we're going to dive in. Joining us here today, we have Ed Callahan, who is a 92 Towson grad, and he's the co-founder and creative strategist at Planet. Brian Davis, 97 graduate, managing director and CEO of Clearview Group. Lance Johnson, 93 graduate and vice president and relationship manager with Howard Bank. And finally, Kelly Mitchell, 91 graduate and principal of Impact HR. So to get us started here today, we're actually going to have a poll come up because we want to find out, where are you in your reopening plan? So we have 3 different options here. Take a second to let us know where you're at. And we're going to go ahead and dive in to learn about what are some of the challenges that are top of mind for yourself and business owners you're speaking with. So Lance, we're going to start with you. I know PPP comes up all the time. Can you walk us through what you're seeing right now with the forgiveness process?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. The process, I think, is it's going to be pretty arduous for banks going forward. The initial rounds were pretty fast and furious, especially the first round of PPP. But what I can recommend is go to treasury.gov, get the loan forgiveness application, complete it, make sure you check all the certifications because that's very critical to the bank. Make sure, we recommend you use work with your accountant to complete it, use a third-party payroll company to provide a reliable source of information. Take it to your banker. Hopefully you have a relationship with your banker because there will be some negotiations, some gray there. The bank's going to confirm all of your calculations. They're not going to go through every little detail unless there's reason to. That's why you need good information supporting it. but they will verify some of the numbers. The bank will make a decision and make a recommendation to the SBA. So the bank says yay or nay. Anything over $2 million is automatically audited by the SBA. So if you're under 2 million, work with your banker. Will be some negotiation because there is some gray area there. And we recommend keeping the information for 6 years, just in case anything happens down the line. But your bankers may be pretty busy in the next 2 to 3 months going through all of these forgiveness requests. Katie?
Absolutely. It's certainly been a crazy time. And I want to kick it over to Ed. Speaking of financials, for anyone that's been in a sales and marketing position, it's been difficult to gauge, how to interact and communicate with people. So Ed, can you talk to us a little bit about how marketing and communication's been affected in this time?
Yeah, sure. And I think that I think overall this would be a very different conversation, even if we were all talking just 3 weeks ago. But the situation continues to evolve and change, and I mean, obviously, there's the not taking advantage of the situation. But I think brand today and companies today it's important to stay influential. And on one side, you have the balance of can I afford to market, but you also have should I be marketing? And the reality is today, many consumers are actually looking for some of this escapism and fun and shopping. And I think that you got to figure out what those guardrails are. And I think the biggest thing you can be doing is monitoring what your industry is talking about. What are people asking, and being a part of those conversations. But I think that, again, if this was a few weeks ago, I would have said, we're really watching what the right thing to do is. Today, which is some of the nature of, some of the conversation today, is how do we all move forward? It is time to really start figuring that out. And it actually is a good time to be moving forward in marketing.
Absolutely. And that's a great transition to speaking of moving forward. Thank you for everyone who completed our poll. It looks like the majority of folks are about 50% of the way there, and then split 50-50 between still unsure of the plan and we have our plan and we're ready to go. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll have some more strategies that you'll be able to continue to work on this. And I'm going to kick it to Brian now. So as we talk about going back, how are companies starting to prepare? What's this going to look like?
Yeah, well, Ed said that, if we'd asked this question 3 weeks ago and we started talking about this, and I think when we first started talking about it, Katie said, well, we can talk now, but, things are going to change, and things are moving slowly but rapidly in certain areas, right? You've got the governor in consultation with the coronavirus task force and the National Association of Governors, which is relying heavily on the White House coronavirus task force and locally the Johns Hopkins public health principles. They've laid out the Maryland Strong Roadmap to Recovery. So that's out there. And I think we'll have a link to that if people are looking for that. But as everybody should know by now, it's going to be a phased approach. And we're seeing, as of yesterday at 5:00 p.m., that even the definitions of those phases have some flexibility and interpretation in them. As of tomorrow at 5 p.m., I think all 24 Maryland jurisdictions are going to be in some portion of phase one. And the governor indicated that despite 2 days of increased hospitalizations, that some jurisdictions are going to maybe move into some component of phase 2. So it's not really this, gate where you get through it and, you forget about it. There's things moving back and forth. So the bottom line is it's going to be a slow phased approach. I think, first and foremost, the biggest challenge that they're going to be facing is that, we're going to be dealing with people and their emotions, and people are charged up on all sides of this thing. And you've probably seen, if you're not one of those people that have switched sides, right? At first, it's no big deal, or I'm in full blown panic mode. And then people have switched because it's been a long time, and it's an emotionally driven thing. So, from a challenge perspective, going back, we're going to be dealing with all those different personalities, and there is no right answer, right? So you're going to have to understand, your constituents, your employees, your clients, your prospects, your recruits, your customers, if you will. I can tell you that, for us, we're lucky that we've got Tom Hood over at the MACPA, who is very plugged in. The MACPA is the trade group that represents our industry. And, he's been very involved in working closely with the governor. And I have to say he's been doing a great job. We've had a lot of polling. You did a poll at the beginning of this, and over the last 6 weeks, we've seen, the biggest concerns of the leaders of these businesses is really profitability and sustainability. But then when we poll the employees, and I think it's a given that they're concerned about the health and safety. So I don't want to, say that the owners of the businesses are only worried about money. I think it's a given. But when you look at the members of that organization, the biggest concern they have is clearly health and safety. And as of May 18th, a poll that was done, 64% of them were ready to get back to work. So that seems like a really big number, but that also means that 34, 35%, somewhere in there, because there's the percentages, are unsure and not ready to go back to work. So, you've got all those different personalities that you're going to be dealing with. The other challenges, obviously compliance, and I know we've got Kelly on here who's going to help us talk about some of those things. You really need to recognize right now that you're only one cog in this machine of opening back up, right? You've got a landlord. I'm in my building today. I've got a jacket on because the landlord finally turned the air conditioning on. Of course, it's cooler today, so I'm freezing in here, right? But there's nobody to call in the building today, right? So you're one cog in the machine. Your supply chain is going to be messed up. I mean, Ed talked about, people looking to buy things and have some fun. I like to road bike. Race Pace is a company that I've been, buying stuff from for years. But they sent an email out 2-3 days ago that there's a 3-week wait time just to get your bike repaired, and inventory is low because all the manufacturing is shut down. So, depending on your industry that you're in, you can't just think about you and how you feel. You have to think about all the inputs to your industry. So, and then there's that profitability piece, right? We're a CPA firm and a consulting firm, so we know that many businesses work 20 or 22 days a month just before they even get to the profitable days, if you will, right? Those last 8 to 10 days. So with this phased in approach, you really need to be doing some analysis on, I know I'm allowed to open, but can I or should I open? Because if I can only have X number of customers, and am I just going to be throwing good money after bad and losing? So there's an analysis there that needs to be done. I mean, you talk about retail, the retail industry, logistics. I mean, Ocean City, and I know people are looking for that release in Ocean City, but those businesses down there depend heavily on an international base, right, for their employees, and they don't have any employees down there. So even if they can open, they don't have anybody if people can get down there. So there's a lot that needs to be considered as you're starting to go back into the workplace. I mean, personally, we have 100+ employees, and we can put all the controls that are recommended for a service business in place. But at the end of the day, we have to worry about where our employees are going, right? So there's just so much. And, there is something that you can use. We've used it. We've looked at it. It's that Johns Hopkins operational toolkit for reopening businesses. I think, we'll have a link to it that you can go to, and it really just helps you consider your risks as you look to, start firing the machine back up and getting back out there.
Yeah, Brian, as you mentioned, there are so many different facets to this. I know at Kat Sabosh, our COO, sent out a survey yesterday to gauge people's comfortability, and she said the answers are across the board, right? Everyone has a different comfort level. And Darlene, I see your question in the chat, so we're going to circle back to that. But speaking on the compliance side, I did want to toss it to Kelly now that, what are some of these challenges? There has been so much new legislation. What are the conversations you're having around new compliance?
Sure, thank you. It's definitely challenging, especially for small businesses. We're all aware of all of those employment regulations that existed prior to COVID-19, and then all of a sudden we are hit with this pandemic, and then we have all of these new regulations that are now put in place. And one of I think the biggest challenges is really around the CARES Act and the FFCRA. We have a lot of clients that we support around, deciphering and understanding what does FFCRA really mean for them. And as I'm sure most of you, or all of you would know, that under FFCRA, there are 5 different reasons why an employee may actually get paid or partial pay for sick leave or expanded FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. And one of the areas that I think most businesses are challenged with is and has been, are with the schools being closed, the daycares being closed. Even though most of us are all working remotely, that still impacts the employees, because if they are in a household with small children, how does that come into play? And I think it's important for employers to know that just because the law exists doesn't mean that every situation that employee might be faced with, especially around daycare and schools being closed, that they're automatically going to qualify under FFCRA. And I think that's an important point for employers to recognize, and more importantly, to have that dialogue with them about, what are some of the other options that we can consider so that we are not, reducing your pay under FFCRA. Can you still get the work and the responsibilities taken care of outside of the normal work schedule? So I think that is one of the challenges right now is, the FFCRA. But as we're starting to reopen, and I see on the poll that, 50% of the respondents said that, they're about 50% there in terms of their plan and bringing people back. So some of the things that I think are important for employers to think about are, how are you actually going to be doing that? What is your plan to strategically bring people back? Brian mentioned that he has about 100 plus employees. Well, I can't imagine that his plan is to bring all of them back all at once, because we still have those guidelines that we need to follow in terms of social distancing, in terms of all of the safety protocols that need to happen. And so, it's understanding what you need to do, how you're going to do it, bring those people back. But as you're bringing those people back, we still have all of the other regulations that we still need to be compliant with. For instance, the Equal Employment Opportunity regulations, the Americans with Disabilities regulations. And so as it may be easy enough to say, okay, we're going to prioritize and we're going to have this kind of phased approach to bring people back into the workplace, we also need to be careful and mindful about, okay, could this be perceived as somewhat discriminatory because of the way we're selecting people to come back? Or could this potentially violate any type of disability or reasonable accommodation type of needs that some of our employees might have, because they might be high risk, or they might have situations that's happening at the workplace? So a lot of compliance issues, but I think the complexity really is that none of the existing compliance regulations went away, right? It wasn't replaced. So employers just have to be very mindful about, how they're implementing and complying with the new laws under the CARES Act, as well as continuing to be compliant with all of the regulations that are in place today.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is, you have big businesses that really manage all of that appropriately, and then you have very small businesses that are trying to figure out how to do it on their own, and I think that's going to be the challenge from a liability standpoint, or the right thing to do. Like specifically, we're using 5 phases that we've put in place, and every phase is voluntary, where we're doing this a little bit at a time, but every phase all the way to the end is going to be, you can come back when you're ready to come back also. But that's why we've built it out, not just in 2, but in 5, so we know we can carry that thing through.
One of the things that I also wanted to add, and thank you, Ed, is that I believe, Katie, you mentioned that your employer actually did a quick survey to find out kind of a pulse on where employees are right now. And that is something that we've been doing quite a bit of and helping our clients, is to understand that mindset of the employees. Brian also mentioned kind of the emotional roller coaster that people are on right now, is really understanding as part of that plan, with those phases, like I had mentioned, in terms of bringing people back, to truly understand what's the mindset of your employees, right? What percentage of them are really fearful right now of coming back? And if they are fearful and coming back, that should be part of your plan. Right, they should be a part of the plan of how are you going to be addressing those individuals if you are going to be requiring them to come back to work.
Absolutely. And I can tell you from an employee standpoint, it really meant a lot to see that survey coming from leadership because they know it's a tough time for people. And whether everyone has different challenges working from home, whether it's productivity, whether it's you have kids at home and you have no childcare. And so I think the survey was also really helpful for them to understand some of those challenges to say, hey, what can we do to fix it? Can we get you another monitor? Can we make sure that you're in that last phase of going back if you do have childcare responsibilities. So Darlene, thank you so much for your question. Darlene's question is, have you heard anything further on automatic forgiveness of PPP loans below 1 million? Lance, do you have a comment there?
Yeah, I have not heard anything more about that. Things have been tossed around, but nothing concrete to date.
Yeah, personally, what I would say is that until anything is law, it's almost not worth talking about because, things change so quickly with this thing that if you plan for that type of situation, you might really get caught in a bad situation. As Lance mentioned in the beginning for this PPP stuff, you got to have it documented. You got to make it easier on the banker as easy as you can because the volume that they're dealing with is just incredible. And the deadlines are coming. So I would not plan on automatic forgiveness. I would have everything documented and memorialized and buttoned up with a bow on it. So then when you sit across from your Lance, you can explain what and why, and then your banker can be your advocate for you to the extent they can because they understand the what and the why.
Got it.
Lance, do you have any strategies for the unforgiven portion or any strategies just to relate to the folks on the call today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sure some business owners or people who are dealing with business owners are hearing the concern, the timing issues of PPP when they receive the loan versus the period you have to use it, the covered period. So there have been some frantic conversations on what do I do here? The timing's not right. The economy hasn't picked up, or specifically the revenue for my business won't pick up in time. So what do I do? So companies are considering using the PPP money for unforgivable or ineligible uses, operations, keeping the lights on. And if that happens, and if you're in that situation, it's going to roll to a loan with a 2-year or 24-month payback period at a 1% rate. And then after that, I'm going back to relationship with your banker and your bank. Hopefully you have one. And then you can negotiate what happens if you can't pay that or whatever situation you're in. But if you don't use it and you're in a situation where, if you don't use it for eligible purposes, and you're in a situation where your portion or all of it's going to be unforgiven, you're not alone. Talk to a banker about it. Be prepared for that 1% over 24 months. And you got to keep the business open, right?
Absolutely. A question from Amy. I work for an insurance agency. What about allowing visitors in the office? What's the best way to handle face-to-face meetings?
So I'll talk a little bit about that if you want. The state of Maryland has kind of issued what the state did, if you don't know, is they gathered industry group leaders to basically make recommendations and try to form, approaches and methodologies to doing some of this. And then they posted these recommendations out there, right? And so for the professional services, financial services, the recovery advisory group made some recommendations. And, one of the things that they did was they piggyback off of something else Johns Hopkins put out there, which is their School of Public Health modified hierarchy of controls. And they listed those in their order of, I will say, perceived effectiveness. And those controls included things like physical distancing. And you've heard that term over and over again. So whenever possible, people should still access work from home. You got to maintain that physical distance within the workplace and put these best practices it, if you will, so you can manage the foot traffic. You've seen the ingress and egress of certain things, different doors if you can. So physical distancing being the first one. Engineering controls is the second one, and that includes things like physical barriers between people, plexiglass barriers between cubes and offices that are less than 6 feet apart. Reconfiguring office interiors, which, as you can imagine, can be wildly expensive. The third one would be administrative controls, would be redistributing responsibilities to reduce the contact between people and kind of rotating staff in. And I'll use my doctor's office as an example. And I actually had my physical for my doctor yesterday, and so last week we did a video call, and then I actually had to go into his office yesterday for the rest of that, as you can imagine. Sorry for everybody participating here, but when I got there, I had to do I had to call them, and they made me wait in the parking lot until everybody was gone. And now, doctor's office obviously is a collection of sick people in a lot of cases, right? So they're being very cautious there. But once I got to the door, the first thing they did was hit me with that touchless, contactless thermometer and hand sanitizer and all that stuff. And I had to wear a mask, and they had 2 masks and a face shield on, and all kinds of stuff. So those are the types of administrative controls where you can't deal with the physical distancing and the engineering controls, using the technology, which we talked about, which was the video chat. And then that last category of this hierarchy is the PPE, that protective equipment. So, we're a CPA and consulting firm. So we're in the same boat as the person that asked the question, that we have to deal with clients that either come to us or we go to them. And so the recommendation really by the state is to follow these things as best you can. And when you do that, you should be able to help mitigate or limit some of your liability, but you're still going to be capped at the number of people you can have in there. And then you got to go back and consider, the impact on the employees, right? The employees are not, in Ed's case, they're volunteering to come in when they can, right? But some companies aren't doing that. They're requiring you to come in. So then you're going to be dealing with all the issues Kelly talked about, right? Are you forcing somebody to come into a situation where they feel uncomfortable? So this thing is really cumbersome. But the short answer to your question would be, if you get that hierarchy that was published and you understand what's in each one of those categories, you just have to try to do that as best you can when you're going to meet those clients. So try to have the barrier between you. Try to, one thing being that it's summer and nice weather, one thing that is being highly recommended, because, again, you're hearing doctors saying, yeah, maybe you can't get this thing as easy if you're outside. If you stayed 6 feet away and you sat outside in a setting, it's better than being 6 feet away and being in an inside setting. So that's why this is a slow phased approach to re-enter, because there's still nobody knows how this thing really reacts. The one thing I'll tell you, after spending time with my doctor yesterday, I really was hammering him on all this stuff, on what this stuff really is. This thing is a respiratory disorder, but more and more, and I'm not a doctor, so don't quote me on this, but more and more they're finding out that this is more of a circulatory blood clotting disorder. So, if they're still figuring it out, what in the heck can we do on our end to minimize these things and the client contact? And the best thing that the state is recommending, and personally for our firm, what we're going to do is maintain that physical distance, because you just don't know. You just don't know.
And I'd like to add, as Brian mentioned, you have all of those best practices with all of the safety protocols and the social distancing and the PPPs, right? The protective personal equipment, like the face masks. I don't believe that there is a one size fits all solution for every company out there, right? Whether you're small or you're large. I do think that what it comes down to is communication by the employer regarding what are the processes going to be when it comes to your visitors. Is it going to be one customer at a time coming in? Are you going to require your customers to wear a face mask and have to use a hand sanitizer before they actually come into the office? Is it where, you have all of your employees determine that, there's an internal calendar where you're identifying that when customers are going to be in, so that you minimize how many people are coming into the office? So I don't believe there's a one solution, one size fits all kind of solution for everyone. I do think that it's important, as Brian mentioned, that employers be really diligent about all of those best practices and the safety protocols, the engineering controls, and everything that OSHA has out there for employers regarding safety in the workplace. But when it comes to customers and visitors, it really comes down to communication and letting everybody know that's in the office, how are you going to be treating your customers? Or are we even going to have customers come in at all? Maybe it is all virtual, for the time being again. So I think there's a lot of thoughtfulness that needs to go into some of these issues. But as long as there's a plan, a thoughtful plan in place, and that's communicated to the employees, that should mitigate some of that uneasiness or maybe even some of that risk.
Absolutely.
And just to piggyback on that risk component there, right? So as part of my hammering my doctor yesterday and asking him all these questions, he shared a story with me about how he was contacted by a lawyer who was representing a family who had a young child die from this multi-system inflammatory syndrome, and it's a super sad situation and unfortunate. And his take on it was that there is no standard of care yet, so it's hard to have a liability on a doctor because they're still figuring this thing out. That's my point. But practically, there's always going to be somebody that tries that. And Kelly was talking about limiting some of this risk. I know that as we were talking to the advisory group and working with the governor and his committee, for these businesses, not just ours, every business that's reopening, limiting liability was a big component of it. And the governor made it abundantly clear he doesn't have a magic wand where he can minimize or mitigate liability, because that is a General Assembly thing, right? And the Assembly is not in. So there is talk of a special session coming and trying to find a way to make these businesses a little bit more comfortable. But the caveat there is, while there's no standard of care for the person that passed from this because it's a novel virus and it's new, with these recommendations in place that they're saying, hey, before you open, you follow these 4 components of the hierarchy, we recommend this. Then it becomes, okay, well, is there a standard, not a standard of care, but is there a standard we're supposed to be following? And if we don't follow that, do we open ourselves up to the risk? So to Kelly's point, I just want to be clear that they're already talking about, if you follow those things, you've got a greater chance of mitigating and minimizing your risk. But if you don't, then you're really opening yourself up. So,
Yeah. Great points all around. And I just want to say, I'm loving the activity I'm seeing in the chat right now. We want this to be a really interactive session, so please continue with your questions and comments. Dave Carberry, hi Dave, one of our favorites. He said Howard Bank did an awesome job getting us the PPP grant approved and funded. Lance, I think, am I correct in saying 18,000 jobs were affected personally from Howard Bank? Is that the right number?
Yeah, that was a result after round 1. I think we processed over 800 in round 1 and impacted 18,000 jobs. So we were pretty proud of that. Took a little, a breather, got ready for round 2, and that's been a little bit more manageable than the tsunami, I say, of round 1.
Yeah, absolutely. From Jonathan, great discussion all around. Where do you see the economy landing in 2021? Ed, why don't you kick us off here again as we look at moving forward and talking about marketing and selling? Where do you see things ending up?
I think that obviously it's kind of a little bit of a magic ball, but I think that we're seeing from a marketing standpoint where I can give guidance is that it's nothing really was stopped. With the programs that we saw, the clients that we have, and what I've been reading in the market is things just kind of stalled and they went on hold. Obviously, there's a financial issue that companies are dealing with, but we haven't seen anything really going away, stopping completely. It's just, listen, we know these things are important. And I think what we all have to remember that this was not a result of an economic recession. There was the government or the economy was, on firepower mode right before this happened. And so a lot of companies pulled back, companies stalled. But the hope here is that this is going to take off again. And the only thing that I can tell you from my standpoint is, again, is that the budgets that we see, the clients that we're a part of, was just we're at a holding pattern. So I see things continuing to starting to grow again. And I'm going to even go as far as saying, I don't think this is something that's going to stall till next year. I think there are companies that are actually in the starting gate trying to figure out when and how they should actually come back out of things.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I've, been paying very close attention to from the beginning. And I think, not just our banker, but every banker that we have a relationship with as an accounting firm. I spent a lot of time talking to a lot of them. Somehow Lance evaded me. But some of the folks at Howard did not. And Ed's, passing comment is spot on. This is not 2008. This was not an undercapitalized banking situation and the economy, falls out from underneath of you. My concern is the longer this thing goes on, it could turn into something similar to that because, as you know, some of the big banks, the Wells Fargos of the world, they've got asset cap limits on them based on what happened in 2008. So, when the big companies draw down their line of credit, right? Hey, you're not eligible for the PPP because you have access to other capital. What's the other capital? It's my line of credit. So they draw down their line of credit. It starts to take those banks and put them a little bit closer to their asset caps. And then, lo and behold, what do? They just put it in their checking account, right? So that's a double whammy for those folks, and which then has an impact on the small folks, right? I consider our firm a 100+ person firm of small business, right? We're not $100 million yet, but so that has an impact on the smaller firms, and we've seen. Here's what I'll tell you about as it relates to the economy specifically, right? We've seen a lot of deals still getting done. We're working on probably 5 deals right now that we were not working on 5 weeks ago. We've got some startups, particularly in the telemedicine, that we're dealing with and helping them get going, and they've got, capital coming in, from these big hospital systems that are investing in this type of stuff. So we're seeing some opportunity there, right? In this chaos, as somebody put in one of their comments, in the chaos, there's opportunity. One of the things that I told all of our constituents, again, on the front side, is that, this environment is likely going to reward the swift and punish the slow. And so, but that's not, it's also going to punish some folks that have no control over this thing. Right, these restaurants, they're in a real bad spot. So, from a big picture global economy, I agree 100% with Ed. But in our communities, I really think we're going to see some problems. I mean, it was heartbreaking to drive down Reisterstown Road about 4 weeks ago and see, these cars in line, because most people do live paycheck to paycheck. And these are not, beat up junky cars. These are people that have decent cars that just didn't have any cash, and they were getting food from. So I think the economy 2021 is going to be okay, but I think that in our communities we're going to still see and need to provide help, and I think we just need to kind of adjust our mindset on profitability and really are going to have to find that rising tide to lift everybody.
Yeah. Brian, I think that's such a great point when it comes to opportunity, right? And moving swift and identifying. And I'm curious, all the panelists, do you have opportunities of, examples of companies who have done it right, who have been able to pivot quickly, and haven't taken advantage of this situation, but have identified those opportunities?
Yeah, and I think that I'll start here. Is I think it's easy to look at, again, I'm on a marketing lane here, but it's easy to look at the bigger players and what they're doing, and then I'll bring it back to, I think, locally how we can relate to that. And there's one is, I think, the messaging of we're all in this together. People are tired of that at this point. I think it was really great, and I think it's always important to have that lane and understanding of the seriousness of this. But I think at this point we've heard so much of that messaging. Moving forward, that is not the message to have. And there's big companies like Cottonelle reminding people not to overstock, and that that we understand your concerns, or a McDonald's, concerning about, bringing up concerns about food safety and precautions that they're taking. Those are great messages to move forward that are relevant to today's marketing. But again, those are big campaigns. And I think when you think about probably the people on this call and the people that are going to be listening to this, let's bring it back a notch. And I think that what could we all be doing, and how can we be doing things great? And one is, as Brian said, it's important to keep going. And we got to continue to move our brands forward, and we need to continue to be as digital as possible. It's really, it's continuing to be even more so of a new normal, and looking at things like digital video and e-commerce, companies that have not been taking advantage of that yet, these are the kind of things that you have to start attacking. Content marketing, I think it gets to be an overused buzzword sometimes, but content marketing is education, teaching, communicating with people through social media on the messaging that they want to hear about. We can connect with audiences like never before, and now is the time to be putting that on steroids. I spoke earlier about tools. I mean, you can, no matter, regardless of your business, you can go, you can have a view into what are people talking about your industry and your product line, or your types of companies. What are the questions? What are the conversations? We have insight to that today. And those are the lanes that, again, local companies need to be really running with that. And just constantly reassessing. Again, 3 weeks ago, between today and 3 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago before that, it's been a completely different situation. So I think it's important for your teams to be reassessing, where are we today? What should we be talking today? How should we be pushing product today? How relevant is it to sell today? And I think that sort of list that I kind of threw out there is really something that all of the local companies, that's where they need to be spending their time. Not a big campaign, but focusing on these kind of digital activities.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone wanted to share examples of whether they've had clients that have taken, a spin on things. I think, Brian, we had been talking about some. I don't know if you have any feedback here.
I mean, who knows what we were talking about when we were talking about that? But I have examples. I mean, we've got lots of clients, and we've got some that have kind of thrown their hands up in the air and been paralyzed, and you kind of smack them and you say, look, that's not going to get you anywhere. And then we've got some that have totally reinvented that, and some that aren't not even clients, or smaller clients of ours. I think of, Clean Cuisine. They're a family-run, catering business, if you will, and nobody's doing catering right now. So if you take what Ed said, it's not these giant campaigns. He put his cell phone out there, and he said, I know the grocery stores are running out of food, but the Ciscos of the world have all kinds of food because the restaurants are closed. So I can get these steaks, and I can get this, and I can get this, and I can sell this. And he was just pounding Facebook with that. And the grassroots effort that he put out there allowed him to pivot his business. And he'll tell you that, if you are an owner of a business like his, a small business, and you don't give your customers your cell phone, then you are doing yourself a disservice. So many of those people are sitting there, paralyzed. And again, now in their circumstances, they were able to do that, right? Because it's him and his wife that are running this business, and they've got a few small employees that are handling it, but they totally pivoted on what they were doing. And they've done a fantastic job of, I hate to use the word, but surviving through this in an attempt to find a way to thrive through this. And it was a total, pivot on how they were operating before. So
Yeah.
I've seen it with a lot of different businesses.
Yeah, I see Amy commenting here about working with Kelly and Associates and Care First, being really supportive. Again, we've talked about whether it's with your broker or your banker or your accountant, relationships have always been the name of the game, right? But especially in times like this. We had Anne-Marie, who is a fellow member of the Alumni Alliance. Hi, Anne-Marie. The pandemic has created a telecommute work community that we have never known before. Curious to hear some comments on the impact this new normal may have on real estate as companies possibly move to allowing companies to work from home.
For
Any of our
yeah, I can start out. I think for us is I will admit I was a little more old school in the thinking that how often our employees can be working from home versus in an office, and I think this has been sort of a real kick in a positive way to, we have 75 people. Everybody came home, all their equipment came home, digital video, everything came home. And it was what I thought was going to be a disaster, turned out to be a really eye-awakening on how efficient we can be, how regular Zoom checkups and meetings can be, client meetings, client presentations. It's really been incredibly interesting to see how the efficiency that has been gained in some areas. We've seen some dips in, again, client budgets, pulling back, but the efficiencies that our team has been doing from home was a complete surprise. And there will be a new normal coming out of this, I think, for a lot of companies in regards to, if I had to shop for office space today, I don't think I would need 30,000 square feet that I'm existing have. And so I think there's going to be some of those new normals coming out going, hey, you know what? My developed programming team, they sure as heck can work from home. They don't even come to meetings. They're wired to work better in that environment, connected, communicating with each other that way. So it's really going to be interesting how we continue to translate what we're doing at home and bringing that back inside again.
And if I could add, we deal with a lot of clients that are kind of very similar mindset, right? They're very used to having all of their employees working out of one location and seeing them and talking to them in person. And now that they've kind of experienced this remote from home, working from home remotely is as effective as having everybody in the office. It is kind of that mindset shift of, that it's really working and people can be productive and still get their work done. We have clients that, were looking at new space. Their release was kind of coming up and they were looking at office space. And right now that's all been placed on hold because, as Ed mentioned, kind of coming out of all of this, it is not going to look the same. And you may not need an office space as large as you thought you needed because we will need to continue with this remote working for a little bit longer, I think. And so, to answer that question about, the effect on commercial real estate, from my experience, I think that it would slow down a little bit, at least for a little while longer, until people are completely at a point where they have their workforce ready and within a plan of who's going to be physically at the office on a more semi-permanent basis, and what is that going to look like for them.
Anne Marie, Lance here. I have a client who was negotiating a larger lease in the Columbia area before COVID, and now is negotiating a smaller lease around the corner for better space, smaller space, more efficient space. But those things are happening, direct effect on the real estate market.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a couple things. I mean, look, we're a client service industry, so we were able to flex relatively quickly to work from home because we're used to working in different remote locations. I think the feedback from our people is that, hey, we're good, but I think people do crave that, collegial environment in some cases too. But I think from a real estate perspective, things are always cyclical. And if you look at Best Buy right now, what is Best Buy? They're just a giant warehouse, right? You can't go into Best Buy. But you can go online, order it, and drive there and pick it up. So I think we'll see some shift in some of that real estate. The restaurants, again, I'm really worried about the restaurant industry for a guy that can't even eat at most restaurants from food allergies. So I think it'll be cyclical. I do think the real estate market, and I think people are going to be hesitant to do those expansions. We just finished an expansion, and I can't tell you how many times I've shaken my head and scratched my head and said, this is sad. You've got this brand new bright space and nobody in it. But I think it will be cyclical. I think it'll go down. And Cushman & Wakefield, they've got a big practice in Asia. And if you look at the things that they're saying, I think they're a pretty good barometer because they've been through this in Asia already. and they've been through the shutdown, reopen type of thing. And they're doing quite a few webinars and quite a few publications on what they've seen there. So I think that'd be a good barometer for people if you're curious about what they've seen.
Yeah. Gary, I love that. Work is a verb, not a noun. It's so true. And Ken, over 1,200 square feet of space available in Annapolis because of our success. It's really interesting to see. At Katz Abosch, we were definitely strict at the work from home policy for some of our staff members. And now, that things have turned. People have made it work however they can. So, Kiefer, most important question of the day. Love it. How do we get the roar back? Ed, you've talked about this, right? It's time to move forward. What are we going to do? We've survived, and now it's time to look forward. So, Ed, do you want to kick us off there? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I just think it's time. It's and again, I am a total glass is half full, and you're going to find different perspectives. And I think for all the people attending this, there's a wealth of information of everything that we're speaking about here, and what you're getting is some really interesting opinions from people that are very close to this market and very relevant to what's going on today. And my opinion is that there's the companies that are not taking advantage of the situation today, but really understanding how this affects their business, their customers, and their clients, and making it from a marketing standpoint. How are they actually, what lane are they creating today? How is it continuing to be an active part of a conversation? One of our largest clients said that, in his previous business, he said, listen, when there was another slowdown, he's like, that's when I saw that the competition wasn't doing anything. And he goes, and I pushed forward. Now, today, it's got to be completely respectful. You've got to be aware of what the empathetic situation that we're in here today and how you go to market. But there are ways today from a business to really move forward and find lanes and really do some interesting things. So make marketing. It's like, what are we doing? In the list that I gave earlier, it's how are we doing these things? Because there are so many companies, local companies, that are just saying, they're pulling the brakes. They're saying, listen, we're not going to, marketing is not priority right now. We're going to worry about these 4 things. And there's other companies that are saying, listen, you know what? We can create awareness right now of our products and our services and our people and how we think, and we can educate our market. We hear people out there asking, we'll find that out and move forward.
I'll answer that from an employee talent management perspective, and maybe more so internally for companies to create that roar again. And I think it's really keeping your folks engaged. What is happening with the company? What are some of those new policies? How are we going to send out the message externally about who we are and how we do the work and who are our customers? I guess to Ed's point about that branding and continuing to send that message out externally, but keeping your employees excited about who they're working for. And how do you do that? I go back to the communication piece that I mentioned earlier. It's keeping them informed. And I think that's one of the best ways to get employees engaged about who they're working for, where they're working, who their customers are, to let them know kind of the who, the when, the why, and the how of how they're going to continue forward. And, if things have changed, if things have pivoted, you need to communicate that and share with the employees why you pivoted. And what's the new for us, so that they're always engaged with what is happening with the company. And that's one way to keep them, productive and help share and spread that branding for them. Because I do think with bringing people back, we're going to have employees, and you guys have probably heard it, where they're very, they don't want to come back. For maybe they're making more money on unemployment, and they're saying, I'm going to continue my unemployment, which is a whole other issue that, from a compliance standpoint, we can talk about. But, or they're come straight out and say, look, I'm really scared. I don't want to come back to work right now. I don't think we're ready to come back to work right now. So, if by chance as an employer, we're faced with employees like that, you may have a vacant, an opportunity there to bring on new folks. And so again, what is that message? that you're sending to these applicants or these candidates that you want to bring on board? What is that brand for you? And again, sharing the who, what, when, and how with them is going to be just as important because they are going to be part of that, that branding process.
Kelly, that's huge, and it's something that we probably all should have touched on a little bit in our conversations earlier. But how, as businesses, we're communicating to our employees, just so critical right now on how we're being honest with them, and explaining to them what we're doing as organizations, and just really completely being truthful. And it really seems to be working.
Yeah, and part of that communication, and just kind of go back to that compliance piece of all of this is, it's the new normal, right? And so I think Katie mentioned a little while ago about her policies or the policies that exist at Katz Abosch. We all have policies, right, that apply to our employees, and all of those policies applied prior to COVID-19. But as we're kind of going into this new normal, do those policies still, apply? Are they going to be, managed the same way that they were managed prior to COVID? And so one of the best ways to communicate with your employees are some of those changes in your policies, right? So about remote work, telecommuting, right? Absences, leave requests, compensation issues and benefit issues and all of those, because the more well-informed employees are, they can continue to be productive and they will continue to be engaged with the employer.
Yeah, and this is a perfect way to kind of wrap us up here. We're in the last 2 minutes. So, speaking of roaring, any final last takeaways for the audience here today?
I'd like to kind of give some advice on roaring and continue to roar. Speaking with business owners, they've, for the downtime, have had some time to reflect and think about their business and prepare for the future. And so with that comes a thought of how do we not make the next issue as great, right? How do we prepare our business to take on the challenges in the future? And so I'd really like to say, and we can see this through the PPP process, round 1, 2, and ongoing into loan forgiveness, is really build a relationship at your bank. Whatever bank you use, make sure that you know your banker and your banker knows you and your business. I'd recommend working on your balance sheet because that will get you through troubled waters in the future. I saw someone in the chat mention this. Please reduce your debt. That always helps at any time. Please grow your net worth. Leave something in the business because your bankers love that. It makes it easier for them to lend to you. And please get a line of credit. Put a line of credit in place when you don't need it. Because just think about, as Brian mentioned, businesses were able, if they couldn't get PPP, they could tap into their line of credit, right? It'll help you sleep at night. So if we do go through something like this again, your balance sheet's solid, you've thought about this, and you have something to fall back on, and you know your banker.
Great, thanks, Lance.
Yeah, I'll just, in final closing here, I know I mentioned that this environment would reward the swift and punish the slow, but from my perspective, I think that, I'm going to qualify that now, right? When the building's on fire, drop all your stuff and get out of the building, right? But, you don't have to rush back into that building. And so I would say that, the communication that we've had with our employees, obviously I'd always like it to be more and more and more and more. But one of the things that we did was we were very honest with them and we told them that, hey, you're going to hear tomorrow that Governor Hogan's going to say that people can start going back into the office and blah, 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 blah. We're not going to do that yet. So we're going to be very deliberate on our return to the building because we are just one cog in this machine, right? Somebody asked about clients coming in and I was talking about the maintenance of the building and everything else. So we're going to be very deliberate. So we're going to be a little bit slower because we are able to effectively use the technology and those sort of things. And the bottom line is in the beginning of March, we went to bed in 2020 one night and we woke up in 2025 or 2030 as it relates to how we're going to have to communicate going forward and work going forward. And so, now is a great time to be very thoughtful in how you're going to build those processes and those procedures, all while making sure you're compliant with everything you need to be compliant with. But I also think that compliance is going to change, and it's going to change in the next coming days, weeks, months, and years. It's going to change. So if you're more deliberate in your return to the extent you can be, and I mean to the physical space, right? Then that would be great. You know, the final thing is, you know, one of the things we talk about in our firm all the time is that, you know, none of us is smarter than all of us, right? And so if you can find your group that you trust, and you can just have those candid conversations with people and kind of open the curtain a little bit and look, it's up to you to make your decisions. You founded your businesses, you run your businesses, you're really good at that stuff. I know this is a time where we're just a lot of unknowns, but if you can find that circle that you trust and you can have those candid discussions, you're going to get to the right answers. If you try to do it on your own or in a vacuum, then you're going to wind up a lot of times in that paralysis by analysis, and you may just not go anywhere. So, you know, try to find those people, and you'll work your way through those answers.
And y'all say your companies want to hear from you. You know what? They're ready. And, you know, be sensitive to what's going on, but find that way to continue to be respectfully disruptive out in the market.
I would piggyback on a lot of what Brian said. You know, I loved hearing him talk about his plan, you know, his very thoughtful plan of, you know, what he's going to be doing and what is his strategy in bringing people back to the workplace. And I'll go back to, I think that's key. Communication is so key in letting people know, you know, what are you doing as their employer? But more importantly, the why. And what I mean specifically about that is, as we're looking at, who are we bringing back to the workplace? It's critical for other employees to know why. You know, why them, not me, or why me, not them. You know, what is that process? What is that strategy? How did you come to that? So, you know, the how and the what is great, but more importantly, I think the why and communicating the whys to your employees is just going to be critical.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to all of our attendees. You're all being awful nice in the chat, but you make our jobs a lot easier with how interactive and engaging you are. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to our panelists. Please link in with our panelists. Reach out if you have questions. They're here to be a resource for you. And we're all here to be a resource for each other. We have this great Tiger community. So again, let's make sure we lean on one another right now. Stay safe, stay healthy, the same to your families. And I'm going to kick it back to Alexa now to wrap us up. Again.
Thank you so much, Katie. This concludes our webinar, Reopen, Recover, and Roar. Thank you again to our moderator and our panelists. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. We did record this session and we'll make it available in the coming weeks on the TU Alumni Association social media channels. Make sure you follow the Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance on Facebook, LinkedIn, and on Tiger Connect, the alumni community, to stay informed about events and news. The details are posted on the screen currently. We hope you can join us for another Business and Leadership Alumni Alliance event in the future. In the meantime, you can follow the Alumni Association's upcoming live events and webinars and learn more about them at alumni.towson.edu. Next Tuesday, the Alumni Association will be hosting another live panel discussion with TU alumni in the Maryland tourism industry. Join us at noon to learn about how the pandemic is changing their marketing tactics and what we can expect when public events return. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time.